I was setting the table for dinner when Trevor said it. Mum, what happened to the Miami condo? The one worth 2.5 million. I thought I misheard him. My hands froze on the silverware. I turned to look at him. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, like he was waiting for a confession. Paige, his wife, sat beside him with her eyes glued to her phone, but her fingers were trembling. The kind of trembling that came from holding in something too big to carry. That was the moment the air in the room shifted. The baked chicken on the counter, the soft jazz playing from the kitchen speaker, the iced tea sweating into the glass. All of it vanished. There was only his voice echoing in my head. 2.5 million. Miami condo. I opened my mouth, closed it. My voice came out low, cracked. Condo. What condo? Paige looked up. She didn't speak, just turned her phone around and slid it across the table toward me. On the screen was a photo of a document, a notarized form, my name at the top. A blurry signature at the bottom that looked vaguely like mine if you tilted your head and squinted. The address on the form? A penthouse unit in Brickell Bay. Trevor watched me like a hawk. You signed off on it last year. Don't you remember? That's what you told me when we talked about taxes. You were trying to offload liabilities. Right. I blinked. My heart beat a little faster. My mind searched itself, flipping through dates, paperwork, bank meetings, even memories I didn't want to revisit. No trace. I never owned a condo in Miami. I never signed anything like that. I shook my head slowly. I never bought a condo. I never signed that. He scoffed. Mum, you've been saying for years you wanted to simplify things. We all supported you. But now you're backpedaling. If this gets messy legally, don't think it won't affect all of us. All of us. Like this was my fault. Paige finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost pitying. It's okay, Evelyn. Memory slips happen. Even I forget things sometimes. Don't worry. The way she said that. Don't worry. Like I was a child who'd misplaced her lunchbox. Not a woman who'd paid off their mortgage, put food on the table for 3 decades, and worked double shifts through chemo to make sure Trevor didn't have to drop out of college. I straightened up, looked her right in the eyes. I'm not forgetting anything. She blinked, lips parting just slightly. That shook her. Good. Trevor didn't back off. He pulled out another paper, this one in a red folder. This is a verification letter from the mortgage company. You used the condo as leverage to secure a financial vehicle for estate restructuring. You signed here. And here. He pointed. We just need you to finalize this last acknowledgement form. That way everything's clean before next quarter. He handed me a pen. My hand stayed in my lap. I didn't sign that. I didn't buy that property. I didn't restructure anything. His voice dropped. So did the mask. This isn't a joke. We're trying to help you clean up your finances before you lose the ability to handle them on your own. There's no shame in asking for help. But pretending like this didn't happen. That's dangerous. I stood up. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, from something else. Something hot and rising. Anger, yes, but more than that. Violation. Betrayal. They looked up at me like I was about to lose it. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the pen. I didn't cry. I just stared at both of them and said it as calmly as I could. You forged my name. You stole my mail. You think I won't do anything because I'm old? Neither of them moved. The speaker in the kitchen skipped. Jazz turned to static. I walked to the hallway, opened the little drawer by the door, and pulled out the old file folder where I kept every real signature of mine on record. Tax documents, old home loan agreements, copies of letters notarized during my husband's illness. Every single one. I held the folder in my hand and turned back to them. Don't worry, Trevor. You'll get your signature. Just not the one you want. Then I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it for the first time in years. Let me know, listeners. Have you ever felt like someone in your own family was waiting for you to get weaker, just so they could take more from you? Leave a comment, because what they didn't know is that I was about to show them just how strong I still was. The next morning, I found an envelope stuffed under my front door. No stamp, no return address, just my name in bold black ink across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an acknowledgement form with a blank line at the bottom for my signature and a sticky note attached. It read, "Let's make this simple." I didn't call them. I didn't respond. By noon, Trevor came over unannounced, let himself in like he always used to. He didn't bother knocking, just walked into the kitchen and started talking like he lived there. Said the paperwork was overdue. Said delays would raise red flags with the mortgage company. Said he was only trying to smooth the process before tax season rolled around again. Then he smiled. That kind of smile people use when they're done pretending to be nice. He told me he had already spoken to an estate attorney on my behalf. Said he had taken the liberty of sharing my documents to protect me from future confusion. I stared at him. He handed me a red folder. Said it contained all my updated assets, including the Miami condo, with valuation documents and projected appreciation over the next 5 years. On the top page, in bold, current owner, Evelyn Grace Marston. I flipped through it. Every page felt colder than the last. There were highlighted sections marked for review and authorization. I looked up. Trevor didn't blink. I asked when he added my name to this property. He said nothing at first, then muttered that it was handled discreetly as a tax maneuver. I told him I never bought that condo, never visited it, never even saw it in a brochure. He shrugged, said the deed had my name on it now and that trying to reverse anything would cost both of us a lot of time and trouble. Then he told me that resisting this would make me look unstable in front of legal counsel, that it would delay their upcoming refinance and maybe even trigger a formal review of my capacity to manage my own affairs. He closed the folder gently. I knew what that was. A threat wrapped in concern. Before he left, he said one more thing. He said Paige had reached out to a long-term care coordinator just in case I needed extra help managing things. They were exploring options. That afternoon, I walked outside to collect the mail. The mailbox was empty, but I could feel something was wrong. I checked the trash bin near the curb and found a torn envelope with the IRS seal still visible. It had my name on it. They were screening my mail. Later that night, I searched the kitchen drawer for my birth certificate and social security card. The folder I always kept them in was there, but the documents were missing. In their place was a single sheet of printer paper with a checklist written in Paige's handwriting. Item 3 on the list: consolidate Mum's ID into central file. The next morning, I drove to the local post office, waited in line, asked to verify my mailing address and check if a change had been requested. The clerk typed something in and looked up slowly. She asked if I had recently authorized a forwarding request. I told her no. She leaned in and quietly said a change had been made 2 weeks ago. All of my mail was being sent to a private P.O. box in Trevor's name. I asked her to reverse the change immediately. She printed out a verification form. I signed it. Outside, I sat in my car and watched the paper flutter in my lap. My name, my address, my son's name next to a box number. They weren't just lying. They were erasing me. That evening, Paige arrived while Trevor was at work. She let herself in too, brought a bag of groceries. said she was trying to reconnect, and hoped we could share a nice dinner to talk things over. She made herself tea, walked around the kitchen like she owned it. She asked about my blood pressure meds, said I'd probably forget them if I wasn't careful, said stress could be dangerous at my age. Then she pulled out a tiny bottle of pills from her purse, said they were herbal, said she'd ordered them for me online to help with memory focus, said they were all natural. I watched her place them neatly on the counter. Then she smiled that soft, patronizing smile she always used when she was about to lie. I didn't touch them. I didn't say a word. I let her finish making her tea, let her clean up the kitchen, let her lock the front door behind herself when she left. Then I picked up the bottle. I looked it up. The pills were real, but they weren't harmless. They were flagged for memory alteration side effects in patients over 65. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed and looked at the only photograph I kept on the nightstand, the one of Trevor as a boy, 7 years old, grinning, holding a kite I'd helped him make for the school fair. Then I opened my laptop, and I started a new folder. I named it Evidence. By the end of the week, I had 17 files in it. They wanted to paint me as forgetful. I would make sure the only thing I ever forgot was how much I once loved them. By the end of that week, I stopped pretending things might settle down on their own. On Friday morning, a white SUV pulled into my driveway just before 8. I watched from the living room window. Paige stepped out with a clipboard in one hand and a tall man in a navy windbreaker trailing behind her. He didn't look like a friend. He didn't smile. They didn't knock. They stood on the porch, talking for a few minutes, then slipped a folded brochure between the doorframe and the screen. When they drove off, I opened it. The cover read, Transition Care and Property Support for Seniors. Inside were bullet points. Assistance with document review, housing transfer support, medical guardian referrals, all underlined. At the bottom was a sticky note. This time, no cute handwriting, just 3 words in block capital letters. We are ready. They were escalating. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I was angry. A cold, focused kind of angry that doesn't shake your hands or cloud your judgment. The kind that builds in silence. The kind that waits for the right time to strike. That night, I searched every drawer, every cabinet, every folder in the house. My original deed to the Tampa home was missing. So was the notarized agreement from when I refinanced 10 years ago. My tax records, untouched for decades, had pages removed. Paige had labeled the drawer last month as too messy. Let me organize for you. They had been preparing this for a long time. I didn't sleep. I made coffee at 2 in the morning, sat at the dining table, and wrote out everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, phone numbers, names. I wrote it on paper, not on a computer. I didn't want anything digital they could erase. By 6, I had 8 pages of timeline and a full list of documents missing. At 9, I drove to the property office for Hillsborough County and requested a full search on properties under my name. The woman behind the counter printed a list. There were 3. My current home, a condo unit in Miami under Evelyn Grace Marston, registered 6 months ago, and a small duplex in Fort Lauderdale, marked as a rental asset under my name. I had never seen the third one before in my life. I circled the line, asked her when it was registered. She said April. She glanced at me as she handed the paper over. Her face didn't say pity. It said something closer to concern. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. Said there had been a string of issues like this lately. Said I wasn't the first person to come in asking about properties that didn't feel familiar. I thanked her, walked out, and sat in my car with the paper in my lap. That was when the fear started to crawl in, quiet, not loud, not like a scream, more like a quiet click, the sound of a lock sliding into place behind you. I took a breath, held it, and let it out slow. Then I called a locksmith, told him I needed every lock in the house changed that afternoon. He showed up by 4. By 5, I had new keys, a reinforced deadbolt, and a camera doorbell installed. The next morning, I left the porch light off, sat at the kitchen window with the blinds cracked open, watched as Paige walked up the driveway at exactly 10:15, holding a brown grocery bag. Her routine was always perfect. She smiled at the camera, knocked once, then reached into her purse and tried the old key. It didn't work. She stood there for a moment, then knocked again, harder, then tried the key again. I didn't move. I didn't open the door. She finally slid the grocery bag onto the porch bench and walked back to her car. Inside the bag was a plastic container of soup, a bottle of water, and a typed note printed on thick paper. Please eat something. You've been under stress. We love you. Let us help. Under the soup, hidden between folded napkins, was another envelope. Inside was a draft agreement for medical guardianship. They weren't just planning to take my name, they were planning to take my mind. That afternoon, I made 2 stops. First, to the main branch of my credit union, I asked to meet with a fraud prevention officer. I showed her the property records, the guardianship form, the list of missing mail. I spoke slowly, clearly, not angry, not scattered, just calm. She listened, took notes, and then asked for permission to flag my account for any activity from Trevor or Paige. I signed on the spot. Second, I drove to the office of my old friend Maureen, who'd retired from being a real estate agent 2 years ago. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I explained what was happening, she invited me in, closed the door, and pulled out her laptop. She searched the Miami condo address. It had been listed for rental on and off for 5 months. Short-term leases, different names every time. Photos of the unit had Paige in the background, in one of them, adjusting a vase. I downloaded every listing page. She ran the Fort Lauderdale address. Same story. Short-term rentals, digital trail left carelessly behind. I had proof. That evening, I started organizing the files. The fake guardianship form, the photos of Paige at the condo, the change of address confirmation from the post office, the new property list, the rental ads, and one photo of Trevor on his LinkedIn profile next to a caption that read, "Real estate consultant with expertise in family estate leverage strategies." They were done playing quiet. So was I. And if they thought I was about to sit back and let them turn me into a signature on a form, they'd forgotten who raised them. The morning I started laying the real groundwork, I didn't bother brushing my hair. I tied it up, pulled on an old denim jacket, and slipped a small flash drive into my coat pocket. It held every file I'd gathered so far. I wasn't going to my lawyer. I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. I was going to the building where all of this started, the condo in Miami. I booked a same-day flight, 2 hours in the air, and I was in a cab heading toward Brickell Bay. I hadn't been to that part of the city in years. It looked newer, shinier, but under the clean glass and polished sidewalks, it had the same smell, a kind of heat that never left your skin. When I arrived, the front desk staff didn't blink when I gave my name. They smiled, checked their system, and handed me a guest badge. That told me everything. They had me listed as an owner. I took the elevator up to the 24th floor. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and hotel sheets. I walked to the unit number that matched the address on the paperwork and stood in front of the door. My own name was taped to the box above the buzzer. The door opened before I knocked. A man in khakis and a linen shirt blinked at me. He looked like he had just come back from the pool. He said the cleaning lady told him someone was coming to do a walkthrough. He invited me in. I didn't correct him. The place was staged. Not heavily, but enough to look lived in. Throw pillows arranged, wine glasses on the counter, a folded towel on the edge of the bed. He chatted casually, said he was from Colorado, rented the unit online, said he loved the view, asked if he could extend his stay next month. I told him I'd check the schedule. As soon as he stepped into the bedroom to take a call, I walked to the kitchen counter and opened the drawer beneath the sink. A white folder. Inside, printed check-in forms, cleaning invoices, and a laminated welcome sheet. At the bottom, under a paperclip, I found it. A photocopy of a rental agreement signed by Paige Marston. Not Evelyn. Paige. There it was. Her real handwriting, her name, her email address, and a copy of her ID scanned onto the page. I took a photo of it with my phone. Then I thanked the man for his time, said I'd reach out soon, and left. Downstairs, I asked the concierge to confirm the registered owner of Unit 2411. She checked her system. Read out my name. Evelyn Grace Marston. I asked if there was any recent maintenance request. She said yes, 2 weeks ago, submitted by a Trevor Marston. I nodded, thanked her, then walked back out into the heat, pulled out my phone, and called Maureen. She answered on the second ring. I told her I had just walked through the condo, told her about the rental guest, the folder, the signature. She said she was ready whenever I was. I told her to proceed. That afternoon, she sent an email to the property manager requesting a copy of the full rental history for Unit 2411 under suspicion of fraudulent lease activity. She CC'd me. She used my full legal name. She also sent another email, this one to an attorney she trusted who specialized in real estate fraud involving seniors. At the same time, I drove to the office of the Hillsborough County Fraud Division. I didn't call ahead. I walked in, waited my turn, then sat down across from a man named Harris. He was maybe in his 40s, polite, professional. I laid out every file one by one, explained the falsified address change, the guardianship draft, the hidden rental units, the property deeds I'd never signed, the recent attempt to lock me out of my own affairs. He asked clear questions, took notes, told me he'd seen cases like this before, but rarely ones with so much organized evidence from the victim. He said the office could open a preliminary file. They could start by verifying the altered documents and requesting a hold on any changes to property under my name. I signed the release forms. Then I drove back home, locked the new doors behind me, sat in my kitchen. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but the quiet before a storm. They had thought I would fold, that I would retreat, that my age would equal weakness. What they didn't count on was that I had been building my entire life around surviving. They pushed me. Now I was pushing back. The very next day, I began preparing something they couldn't intercept, something public, a trap in plain sight. And the bait was their own lies. The morning after I returned from Miami, I was at my desk by 6. The sun hadn't even broken through yet, but I was wide awake. I had everything spread out in front of me. The printouts from the property office, the photos of Paige's rental contract, the rental listings with her name in the metadata, the change of address confirmation from the post office, the guardianship draft, the new property registrations I never approved. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't a victim either. I was the case builder, the archivist, the woman putting together her own defense before anyone else could label her incapable. At 7:30, I printed 3 copies of the entire file, one for the county fraud office, one for Maureen's lawyer and one for myself to carry. I slid the pages into a black zippered binder, punched holes, indexed every tab, labeled it Evelyn G. Marston, Active Estate Documents. I wasn't hiding anymore. Then I made my next move. I contacted a real estate agent who wasn't a friend, someone with no connection to Trevor or Paige. Her name was Celia, mid-40s, direct, didn't flinch when I explained what I was dealing with. I asked her to list the Miami condo. She blinked once, then asked for documentation. I showed her the notarized deed Trevor had used, and then my files proving how it was never authorized. I explained that I had a pending investigation open and that I wanted the listing to trigger one thing: exposure. She told me she'd have a photographer there within 48 hours. While she was setting that up, I requested something more discreet, a simple open house flyer. I wanted it shared in certain circles. Professional investors, local brokers, people who would come with phones in hand and questions ready, not to buy, to witness. By that weekend, the listing was live. 3 photos, 1 line of copy, luxury bay view unit now available by direct owner. Inquiries welcome at showing. The first messages rolled in within hours. Celia fielded them, passed along RSVPs, and I waited. I kept the blinds low, answered no calls from Trevor, ignored a voicemail from Paige that said she was worried and asked if I had been feeling confused lately. On Sunday morning, I picked out a blue dress. Not fancy, but sharp. Something I hadn't worn since my retirement party. I brushed my hair back, applied a soft lip colour, and packed the binder into a leather tote. I arrived at the Miami condo an hour early. The agent let me in and gave me the run of the place. Everything was exactly where the renters had left it. Paige hadn't even bothered to take down the welcome sign she taped to the fridge. At 10 on the dot, the elevator dinged. The first wave came through. Quiet professionals, a few couples, 2 women with tablets, then a man in a navy blazer with a real estate logo on his sleeve. 10:15. Trevor walked in. He froze when he saw me. Paige came in behind him. Her hand slipped off his elbow the second she spotted the guests inside. She recovered quickly. Put on that smile. I didn't wait. I welcomed everyone, thanked them for coming, then raised my voice just enough to carry across the open floor plan. I told them the property was under pending legal review, that certain documents had been falsified, that a correction was in process. I saw Paige's eyes dart toward the hallway. Trevor stiffened. Then I opened the binder. I pulled out the printed rental agreement with Paige's signature, then the metadata printouts, then the notice from the county that the duplex in Fort Lauderdale was never declared on my behalf. I laid out the timeline, calm, clear, controlled, and I read aloud the part in the guardianship draft where Paige listed herself as primary medical contact. No one interrupted, no one moved. Then I turned to Trevor. I told him I had filed a formal complaint with the county, that a fraud investigator had flagged activity under his name, that any move he made from this point forward would be seen as tampering with an active investigation. He opened his mouth, closed it. Paige's smile cracked for the first time in weeks. Then the twist came. From the elevator, a new face stepped in. A woman in a grey suit, hair tied back, badge at her waist. She introduced herself as a representative from the Florida Elder Protection Task Unit, said she had received a formal request for a site visit tied to ongoing fraud claims involving the listed property. Trevor's face went white. Paige took a step back. The woman turned to me, asked for verification. I handed her the binder. She flipped to the index, looked up, nodded. Then she turned to the crowd. calmly stated that this was no longer a showing, but an active investigation zone. She advised the guests to exit and encouraged any witnesses with questions to reach out to her department. And just like that, the open house became an open file. Trevor tried to say it was all a mistake, that things had gotten mixed up, that I had misunderstood the forms. The woman didn't even blink. She said quietly that the state took advantage of seniors very seriously. Then she asked Paige if she had anything to declare before the unit was locked for inspection. Paige turned toward the kitchen, said nothing. The officer handed me a new document to sign. It temporarily froze any rental activity under the unit and blocked external party access pending full review. I signed it. Trevor and Paige were told to leave. They didn't argue. And as they stepped out, I watched Trevor glance over his shoulder one last time. Not angry, not shocked, just small. And I knew he finally understood. The woman he thought was slipping was building a wall around him the entire time, and now it was closing in. 2 days after the open house turned into a fraud investigation, the air around my name changed. My phone didn't ring. No messages from Trevor. Not a single email from Paige. Silence, where there used to be pressure. That wasn't peace. That was calculation. They were regrouping, which meant it was time for me to move again. I contacted Maureen's attorney, the one handling real estate elder fraud. Her name was Denise Tran, sharp as glass and quiet as a sniper. She reviewed my binder in less than an hour and asked for digital access to the files. I gave her everything. Denise said she would submit a motion to freeze all property actions related to my name in both Hillsborough and Miami-Dade counties. That included the Tampa house, the Miami condo, and the mystery duplex in Fort Lauderdale. She explained that while the legal wheels turn slowly, a paper freeze would send a message fast. She also flagged something else. She found that the original deed for the Tampa house had been requested from records 3 weeks ago. Not by me, not by my lawyer, but by a notary service working with a company that specialized in elder estate restructuring. She traced the service to a man named Alex Roman, initials AR. That was the same signature on the so-called notarized document for the condo sale. Denise raised one eyebrow when she said it. We both knew what that meant. Trevor had used a personal connection to falsify notarization. I asked her to dig further. She said she already started. The next day, I returned home and opened the mailbox to find a formal letter from a local care facility. Inside, a brochure and a welcome note. The message was polite but firm. My pre-admittance packet was enclosed. A room had been tentatively secured. I hadn't asked for it. I called the number listed at the bottom. The woman on the other end confirmed a family member had submitted my application with basic health information, recent prescription history, and a copy of my ID. She asked if I still intended to check in next week. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. She apologized, said it was common, said sometimes kids try to plan ahead. I hung up. I stood in my living room and stared at the dining chair where Trevor used to sit when he was 10. Used to laugh with his mouth full, track mud across the floor, tell me he loved me without blinking. Now he was trying to tuck me away like a file he didn't want to deal with. I walked into my bedroom, opened the dresser, and pulled out a small fireproof lockbox. Inside were the last few original papers I had left untouched. My marriage license, my husband's military burial certificate, a letter from the VA regarding my benefits, and one yellowed envelope from a lawyer in Ocala. It was the updated will I had signed after my husband died. I pulled it out, read the names. Trevor listed as executor. Everything else, split quietly between him and a few charities I had worked with. It no longer felt right. That afternoon, I made an appointment with Denise to update the will. I removed Trevor as executor. I assigned Denise's office to manage all estate matters if anything ever happened to me. I redirected charitable donations. And I added a new line. Any claim to property, accounts, or medical decisions made on my behalf without direct in-person consent was to be nullified, reported, and legally challenged. Denise slid the papers back into a folder and looked at me carefully. I told her I didn't want to be safe anymore. I wanted to be untouchable. That evening, Maureen called. Her voice was sharp. She said a former client of hers had reached out, confused. Apparently, Paige had contacted the woman to inquire about selling a waterfront property. When asked whose name the title was under, Paige said it was a family transfer and the paperwork was being finalized. It was the Tampa house. They were trying to sell my home. Without a word to me. Without even waiting for the dust to settle in Miami. I hung up the call and didn't pause. I drove straight to the county office. I stood in line. I requested a hold on title transfer for my home. Presented Denise's authorization. Presented my ID. I submitted a notarized statement that no transfer had been approved, signed that morning in Denise's office. I left with stamped papers in my purse. By the time I got home, a storm had started rolling in. Thunder just far enough to rumble. Rain not yet falling. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened the laptop and accessed my security cam feed. At 7:43 p.m., the screen blinked. Trevor pulled into the driveway. Alone. He walked up the path, slow, like he expected a trap. He rang the doorbell. Waited. I didn't answer. He knocked once, twice, loud. Then he leaned in, spoke close to the door, like I wouldn't hear the words otherwise. He said I was making things worse, that this could have all gone smoothly, that they were just trying to protect me from getting in over my head. Then his voice dropped. He said if I didn't cooperate, I would end up alone, broke, and declared unfit. I watched him walk back to his car. The storm broke just as his taillights disappeared down the street. Rain hit the windows like coins. I sat in silence, heart steady. They thought they were closing in, but the circle was mine now. I had just removed them from it. Permanently. By Monday morning, I had already booked the space. It was a clean, neutral conference room inside the local community centre, the kind with beige walls, folding chairs, and a podium that smelled faintly of lemon polish. I picked it for a reason. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't showy, but it was public. And every corner of that room had clean sightlines and full visibility. The title on the sign-up sheet was simple: Real Estate Scams Targeting Seniors, a Community Awareness Session. I asked Maureen to help me spread the word. She passed the notice to her neighbourhood groups, the HOA board, and a handful of local agents she knew had been brushed by situations like mine. No names were mentioned, no threats were issued. Just a quiet invitation to come listen. I brought the binder. I also brought copies. 36 full-colour packets, each one labelled, sorted, and hole-punched. The first 10 guests arrived right on time. 2 real estate professionals, 1 woman who ran a local support group for retired nurses, and an off-duty sheriff's deputy who'd heard from his aunt that something serious had gone down in Miami. By 6:45 p.m., all chairs were filled, even the back row. A few people stood by the wall. I recognized 2 from Trevor's former brokerage circle, another from the condo building management team in Brickell. Then Paige walked in, hair curled, face perfectly done, a beige wrap sweater and diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. She walked straight to the back without a word, stood next to the exit, arms crossed. 2 minutes later, Trevor appeared in the doorway. He didn't come inside. He stood at the edge, as if proximity alone might let him control the narrative. But this time, I was the one holding the mic. I opened the meeting without ceremony, no nervous preamble. I welcomed the guests, thanked them for their time, and then I started walking them through the facts. Property records with incorrect ownership, rental units falsely attributed to elderly individuals, guardianship drafts submitted without consent, mail redirected, IDs duplicated, voice recordings used to impersonate approval. I showed them everything. The faces in the room didn't blink. They nodded. They took notes. Some closed their eyes and exhaled, like they'd just recognized their own family inside the outline I was painting. I moved methodically. Every document had a timestamp, every folder a label, every claim followed by proof. When I got to the part about the Miami condo rental agreement, Paige's signature, her ID photocopied, the platform logins under her name, I watched Paige shift her weight. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't leave. Trevor didn't move either. I finished the presentation with a full-page projection on the wall. A simple quote: "Power of attorney is not a power of control." The room clapped, soft at first, then louder. Not for me, but for the truth, for someone finally naming it in public. I closed the binder. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. From the back of the room, a man in a grey suit raised his hand halfway, then lowered it. He didn't wait to be called on. He stepped forward and introduced himself as Daniel Lynn, legal counsel for the Elder Affairs Advisory Committee. He said what I just presented wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Then he asked if I would be willing to speak with his department directly. I told him yes. As the room began to clear, Paige stepped toward me. Her voice was low, almost calm. She said I had embarrassed them, that things would never be the same after this, that Trevor was considering legal action. I told her the law was already involved, that if Trevor wanted a courtroom, he could have it, but he'd be the one sitting on the wrong side of the table. Her mouth twitched, just once. Then she turned and walked out. Trevor followed. No words, no expression. After they left, I sat back down. The last person to leave was Maureen. She hugged me tight, said I hadn't just protected myself. I'd cracked something open that people had been whispering about for too long. I nodded. The drama they started in silence had now been spoken aloud, in front of a room full of witnesses, recorded, shared, filed. And I wasn't done. The next morning, Denise filed for a temporary injunction against any transfer, sale, or legal claim tied to my estate. The freeze was now statewide. Trevor was named in the order. So was Paige. 2 hours later, we received confirmation that an audit had been opened on the real estate activity linked to both of them, including the name of the notary, Alex Roman. A separate agent from the state licensing board reached out, quiet, but firm. Said Roman's notary status was under emergency review. By noon, the dominoes had started to fall. What began as whispers in my own kitchen was now echoing in offices they used to walk through like they owned them. And from here on out, every door they knocked on would remember mine had been the first they tried to lock from the outside. They underestimated the woman behind it. Now they would learn. By Thursday morning, the tone of everything changed, not just in paperwork or procedure, but in the faces of people who used to look through me like I was furniture. The woman at the bank branch who once waved me off when I asked about an unauthorized withdrawal now stood to greet me. She called in her manager without being asked. The manager offered me coffee before I sat down. Denise had filed everything needed for the formal injunction, but this visit was for something else. Something I wanted documented in person. I signed the form requesting a full review of all joint accounts ever opened under my name. I authorized a freeze on anything with Trevor's signature, voice print, or stored credentials. I revoked power of attorney he had quietly filed years ago and never told me about, the one he used during my knee replacement recovery. I had no memory of signing it. He probably told me it was insurance paperwork. The bank issued the official removal order. I watched the teller click the keyboard, saw my name shrink away from his as it disappeared from their shared records. It wasn't about the money, not fully. It was about name, control, and today I was taking mine back. By mid-afternoon, I had a certified letter ready for delivery, addressed to Trevor, copy to Paige. It outlined the formal revocation of all access to assets, property, mail, records, and medical authority. It included the case file number tied to the elder fraud investigation, and it carried a single line in bold. All future contact must proceed through legal counsel. There would be no more visits, no more dropped-off soup, no more soft-spoken manipulations wrapped in grocery bags. Around 5, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Trevor's voice cracked on the recording. He said he didn't know how things got to this point. He said he never meant for me to feel betrayed. He said this could still be fixed if we just talked like a family. He used every word except the ones that mattered. He never said sorry. He never said guilty. He never said he was the one who started this. I deleted the message. The next morning, I received an email from the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Subject line, follow-up regarding Mr. Alex Roman. They thanked me for my cooperation, informed me that Roman's notary license had been suspended, pending full investigation. That evidence tied to improperly verified documents, including those impacting me directly, had triggered a multi-county review. Attached was a PDF. One of the pages included a scan of the document with my forged signature. Below it was Roman's rubber-stamped seal. Underneath, a note from the compliance officer read, "Signature verified using digital image only. No in-person identification confirmed." It was clear now. There was no accidental paperwork, no miscommunication. They hadn't just taken advantage of trust. They had built a system around avoiding it entirely. That afternoon, I met with a local reporter. Her name was Danielle. Late 30s, straightforward, sharp voice. She covered elder exploitation and financial fraud. We didn't speak on the record, not yet. I gave her the outline, told her I was preparing to speak publicly if necessary, told her she could confirm my identity with the County Fraud Division. She took notes, asked the right questions, promised to follow up. Before I left, she gave me her card. On the back, handwritten in pen, she'd written one word: brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt clear. Back home, I opened the windows. The air was warm, still. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The house was silent. For once, that wasn't a bad thing. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for the next step. It was time to address the HOA at the condo building. Not with drama, with facts, with documents, with law. I made an appointment with the building manager for a formal hearing. I requested time to present misuse of unit access, unauthorized guests, and fraud conducted under their roof. They approved it, offered me 15 minutes on the agenda. I showed up with a stack of printed documentation and a calm voice. I didn't mention Trevor and Paige by name until the end, until I was sure every board member had seen the images, the forged lease, the manipulated invoices, the security footage showing Paige opening the door for short-term guests, the timestamps, the listing history. Then I spoke plainly. I said the unit was not a hotel, that they had policies against subletting without disclosure, that their inaction made them partially responsible. Silence followed. Then a woman on the board asked if I planned to pursue charges. I said the state already had. When I walked out of that room, the building issued a letter to all residents within 72 hours. It reminded them that subletting without approval would result in fines, suspension of access privileges, and potential legal follow-up. It didn't name anyone, but the message was clear. The hallway cameras caught Trevor packing up personal items from the condo the next day. Paige didn't appear. I watched the footage on a private feed sent by the building manager. He didn't smile. He didn't slam doors. He just moved like a man who finally understood he wasn't invisible anymore. By the end of the week, my phone rang again. This time it was the lawyer Trevor had retained. He was polite, professional, requested a meeting. Denise took the call, scheduled the meeting for Monday. I would attend. But not to settle. I would attend to witness him say the words he had avoided since the beginning. Not in a voicemail, not in a whisper. In writing, in front of counsel. I would sit across from the man who tried to erase me, and I would do what he never expected. I would stay silent, because by then, everything that needed to be said would already be written in documents, signed by attorneys, and stamped by the very system he tried to manipulate. The same system that now had him under review, under pressure, under oath, and the silence between us would be louder than anything he had ever said. The meeting was scheduled for 10 sharp on Monday morning. Denise and I arrived 10 minutes early. The law office was quiet, clean, one of those mid-rise buildings that looked generic from the outside, but reeked of polished money on the inside. The receptionist offered us water. Denise declined. I didn't speak. At 9:58, the opposing counsel entered. A man in his 50s, tailored suit, leather briefcase, pleasant voice that tried to soften the edges. Behind him, Trevor followed. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago. His jaw was tight, shoulders stiff, the way someone moves when they've spent too many nights drafting apologies that still don't sound right. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. He didn't look me in the eye. We were directed to a private conference room. Long table, 4 chairs, no coffee, no distractions. The lawyer began with formality, stated their intention. They were here to discuss resolution, not conflict. Said the situation had clearly escalated and that both parties might benefit from putting the matter behind them. Denise let him talk. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she opened her folder, pulled out a printed copy of the fraud report, the rental documents, the notary complaint, and the injunction order. She laid them out, one by one, forming a line between us and them. She spoke in a steady tone. She reminded him that my assets had been tampered with, my signature falsified, my accounts infiltrated, and my independence compromised. She outlined the legal exposure both Trevor and Paige were facing, not hypotheticals, but charges already under preliminary review. Then she made it clear. This was not a negotiation. This was a formal reading of boundaries. Trevor's lawyer adjusted his tie, reached for his briefcase, pulled out a pre-drafted letter and slid it across the table. It was a written apology, not notarized, not framed, just plain white paper. The words were neat, rehearsed, an acknowledgement of overreach, of poor judgment, of misinterpretation of consent. Nowhere did the letter admit guilt. It danced carefully around the truth, placing blame on misunderstanding and miscommunication. I didn't touch it. Denise slid it back across the table. She said it lacked the most important thing: accountability. She leaned in slightly and said we would not accept a statement that erased intent. She said this wasn't about salvaging relationships, it was about documenting the truth. And then she gave him a choice. Either they submit a new statement, one that admits knowledge of false documents, or we proceed with the formal complaint. The one naming both him and Paige, with every attached exhibit. Silence filled the room, the kind that holds breath hostage. Then Trevor spoke. Not to his lawyer, not to Denise, to me. He said he didn't know when he started looking at me like a problem instead of a person. He said it was never supposed to go this far, that he thought he was protecting the family, that he was trying to keep everything from falling apart. I stared at him, and I said one word: liar. The room shifted. His lawyer tried to jump in. Denise held up her hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just kept going. I told Trevor that protecting someone never looks like hiding mail, forging documents, staging a slow erasure of autonomy. I told him he hadn't protected me. He had erased me, and then expected me to thank him for it. And now he would live with what followed. I stood. Denise gathered our things. Before we left, she handed them a final folder. Inside was a declaration of full legal separation. No financial ties, no power of attorney, no inheritance claim, no healthcare proxy, no contact without representation. Trevor didn't stop us. He didn't say another word. Outside, the sky was sharp blue. No clouds, no wind, just silence. We walked to the car. Neither of us spoke until we hit the interstate. Then Denise said something I hadn't expected. She said most people crumble under the kind of betrayal I had faced, that few come out the other side with this much proof, clarity, and control still intact. I didn't answer right away. But I thought of the woman who used to set dinner for a son who never called, who used to leave porch lights on in hope instead of safety, who used to think family meant forever, no matter how far it slipped. That woman was gone. The next day, the official complaint was processed and stamped. An ethics review was opened on Page's brokerage license. A criminal review remained active on Alex Roman. The unit in Miami was formally returned to me, legally frozen pending audit. The duplex in Fort Lauderdale was under investigation for money laundering through digital subletting platforms. My house in Tampa? Untouched, locked, secure. I received a letter from the Department of Elder Affairs confirming their recognition of my documentation efforts. They invited me to join their advisory committee for outreach and awareness. I framed the letter, not for display, for reminder, because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like standing in a room and refusing to bend when the person across from you is counting on you to disappear. And I never disappeared. I was just getting started. By 6:30, the last glimmer of dusk had sunk behind the ridge. The town lights blinked on, one by one, in the valley below, casting long shadows across the highland property. Evelyn sat at the head of the table in the private dining room of McAllister and Rowe, a wood-panelled, invitation-only restaurant reserved for long-time members of the Historical Preservation Board. Every element in the room was deliberate. The fireplace was lit. Her favourite silver candlesticks flanked a modest bouquet of white anemones and magnolia leaves. Across from her sat McClellan Ward, calm, poised, with that faint expression of a man who had already done the math and found it amusing. To Evelyn's right, the attorney, Audrey Whitfield, reviewed the stack of signed documents in a discreet black folio. Then came the footsteps. Brendan's voice echoed first, loud, casual, a little too self-assured. He entered with Kayla draped on his arm, both of them dressed like they had something to celebrate. They brought their own wine. Kayla placed it on the table without asking. Brendan clapped his hands once and declared that he hoped there would be dessert. Evelyn didn't flinch. She folded her napkin once across her lap. Then, very softly, she said dinner would not be necessary tonight. The silence that followed was brief but brutal. Brendan chuckled. Maybe he thought it was a joke. Maybe he truly believed she'd prepared all of this just to hand him a silver platter. He leaned forward, smug, and thanked her for finally coming to her senses. said he had already picked out a contractor to renovate the ranch entrance and a consultant for a short-term rental business targeting film crews. Evelyn looked at Audrey, who reached into the folio and slid 3 documents onto the table. One for Brendan, one for Kayla, one for the press, she said. That would be released in 24 hours. The first page was Evelyn's revised trust declaration. The second was the dissolution of all prior estate plans involving the Whitaker Ranch as an inheritable asset. The third was the official foundation charter and endowment record for the E.M. Whitaker Legacy Fund, now fully operational and independently managed. Brendan blinked. Kayla tilted her head like she couldn't quite read the page. Evelyn kept her voice low, measured, almost clinical. She explained that the ranch was no longer family property, not under any legal definition. She explained that every structure on the land had been assessed and repurposed under a conservation and education clause, which now made the property tax-exempt, but also non-transferable. She explained that the Legacy Fund had already begun partnerships with 6 local organizations, including the Veterans Agricultural Recovery Coalition and the Mountain Women's Housing Initiative. She explained that the guest lodges Brendan had been eyeing were now short-term housing for displaced women, most of whom had been forced out by their own children or caretakers. Brendan's voice cracked first. He asked where this was coming from, why she would do this after all he had done to step up. Kayla leaned away from him slightly. Evelyn heard her whisper something under her breath. It sounded like selfish. Evelyn turned to McClellan, who had said almost nothing all evening. He spoke with the kind of patient authority that didn't need to shout. He explained to Brendan that the land was now held in a protected structure that no court in the state would touch, that the ranch could never be sold, that no private party could profit, and that Evelyn had retained a life lease to the main house and surrounding pasture until her death. Brendan leaned back in his chair like he had been slapped. Kayla stood up. She muttered something about this being manipulative, about this being emotional blackmail. She said no one in their right mind would give away something that big without being pressured. That's when Evelyn took out the envelope. She slid it across the table to Brendan. He opened it. His eyes scanned the pages. His mouth stayed open, but no words came. Inside was a printed transcript, edited for clarity, dated and time-stamped. A full copy had already been sent to Evelyn's counsel and notarized as part of her declaration package. It was the recording from the office, the one from that rainy Thursday. His voice calling her a placeholder. Her son's voice saying she was only useful if she stayed quiet. Her son's voice laughing at the notion of gratitude. Audrey tapped the table gently, explained that the content had not been released publicly yet, that this wasn't about revenge, that it was about clarity. Kayla didn't say another word. She grabbed her purse and stormed out. Brendan sat perfectly still. The candlelight flickered across his face. His knuckles were white. Evelyn finally stood. She didn't yell. She didn't even raise her voice. She said he could visit the ranch if he wished, but only during visitor hours. She said she hoped he would come, not as a son hoping for a title, but as a man willing to understand why legacy meant more than ownership. McClellan offered to drive her home. Brendan didn't move. He just stared at the table. Outside, the cold had deepened. The stars stretched in every direction, unbroken by noise. Evelyn looked out the window as they pulled away from the restaurant. The silhouette of the mountain range stood tall in the distance. Her late husband once told her that land is only as sacred as the way it's treated. Tonight, she had finally understood what that meant. By the time I pulled into the Crestwood Hall parking lot, the sky had turned that familiar kind of grey that made the building's polished windows feel colder than they were. Inside, I could already see people gathering through the glass. The banner above the door read, Marston Family Foundation Community Banquet, in thick gold lettering. It should have said Evelyn's farewell, or better yet, her finale. I stepped out of the car, straightened my navy blazer, and looked at the flash drive in my hand one last time. I had labeled it in my handwriting, quietly, clearly, truth. Inside, the hall buzzed with soft jazz, clinking glasses, and the artificial warmth of obligatory small talk. Tables were dressed in white linen, name cards precisely arranged. Everyone I had ever helped over the years was there. Women from the Domestic Resilience Program, volunteers from the Pantry Initiative, the librarian who had written me that thank you letter last fall, even the mayor, who owed me more favours than he liked to admit. At the front of the room, Brendan was in his usual posture, charming, upright, overly rehearsed. Kayla stood beside him in a burgundy dress that fit the part she had assigned herself. Co-director, heir apparent. She gave a practiced smile to a group of donors and tilted her head like she had done this 100 times. Maybe in her mind, she had. I walked past them without a word and made my way to the far end of the room, where a podium and projector had been set up. A volunteer from the youth program greeted me and gestured toward the reserved row of seats marked for the board. I gave her a polite nod. She had no idea what kind of night this would become. When it was Brendan's turn to speak, he stood tall, brimming with confidence, and began thanking the crowd for their ongoing support. He made sure to mention his efforts, his vision, and how proud he was to be continuing the legacy of the woman who had made all this possible. Me. My name was said with the same hollow sincerity someone might use to thank a stranger for holding the door. I listened, face still, hands folded, letting the weight of each lie stack like bricks. He talked of expansion, new hires, a bold new vision, a future in which he and Kayla would lead the foundation forward with, in his words, renewed energy. Then came the moment he had so obviously rehearsed. He paused and turned toward me, inviting me to the stage for a surprise announcement. The crowd applauded, confused but curious. I stood slowly, walked toward the podium, and for a brief moment let the silence speak louder than Brendan's performance. I took the microphone. No shaking hands. No script. Just years of restraint finally sharpening into purpose. I thanked everyone for being there. I spoke of legacy, community, and the power of women reclaiming their stories. And then I turned toward the screen. One click. The projector flared to life. What followed wasn't a sentimental slideshow. It was the first of several scanned legal documents showing Brendan's attempt to reassign foundation assets to a private LLC under his control. The second showed forged letters with my forged signature. The third, bank records, dates, transfers, signatures. Gasps filled the room like a gust of wind. I didn't have to raise my voice. I only had to show the truth. Brendan's smile collapsed in real time. Kayla froze, gripping her wineglass so tightly I could see her knuckles turn white. I could feel their world beginning to tilt, and I stood steady, exactly where I was meant to be. I turned back to the crowd and spoke plainly, that I had known for months, that I had watched in silence while they orchestrated my quiet removal, that this foundation, this life's work, was no longer mine in name, but it would never belong to those who sought to twist it for greed. Then I introduced the new board of trustees, women I had mentored, trained, trusted, survivors, fighters, builders. None of them bore my last name. I announced the new legal status of the foundation, a private community trust, irrevocable, protected by a new legal charter I had signed with attorney Larson last month. It could not be sold, it could not be inherited, and it could never again be claimed by family lines, only by the hands who worked for it. The applause came slowly, then all at once. A different kind of clapping, one that came from knowing, from recognition, from witnessing something irreversible. Brendan tried to speak. His voice trembled as he addressed the board, asking for clarification, trying to salvage some semblance of control, but there was no saving the moment. Kayla whispered to him, eyes darting. I didn't listen. I walked back to my seat as the projector shut off, the silence in the room still echoing louder than the music ever had. The rest of the evening moved like a dream, not because it was soft, but because it was surreal. People approached me one by one, with gratitude, with questions, with hugs. Some were stunned, others were vindicated. A few whispered that they always suspected Brendan was never ready. He had slipped away before dessert. Kayla followed moments later. No goodbyes. I stayed. I danced with a few women I had hired years ago. I laughed real and loud. I watched the board take control of the agenda, laying out plans, budgets, timelines. My presence wasn't needed to validate the future anymore. I had done enough. As the night drew to a close, I stepped outside for air. The wind was soft, the parking lot mostly empty now. A figure approached me near the garden path. It was Brendan. He looked lost, not angry, just hollow. He asked why, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. I didn't answer. I placed my hand on his arm, steady and warm. Then I said the only thing that felt right. You chose your legacy, and I chose mine. I turned and walked back toward the lights of the hall. My heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence I had spent years writing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. I didn't expect peace to feel like this. It didn't arrive with grand speeches or apologies. It came in silence. It came in the form of a knock on the door that I didn't answer. It came when I sat at my little kitchen table, sipping tea while my phone buzzed across the counter, lighting up with messages I had no desire to read. The press had picked up the story. The trust's launch, the scholarships for women over 60 returning to the workforce, the legal clarity surrounding the will. They called it an act of redemption, of inspiration. The headlines painted me as a quiet warrior. I never asked for that, but I accepted it. A few days after the announcement, I went back to the cemetery, not to cry, but to sit. I brought a folding chair and a blanket, and the book I had been trying to finish for months. I sat next to Harold's stone and read aloud. His name had been cleared. His wishes had been honored. His son could never again twist that legacy for selfish gain. That was enough. Later that week, the lawyer's assistant delivered the final packet. Everything had been transferred. My house, the royalties, the remaining assets. Not to Grant. Not to any of them, but to the foundation, to the people who would never have the luxury of betrayal, because they had never been handed privilege in the first place. It felt right. It felt sharp. It felt like balance. I saw Grant once more. It was by accident. I was leaving the community center after meeting with the first group of women enrolled in the life skills program. We had been laughing about how difficult online banking still felt for some. I stepped outside, and there he was, standing by the curb like a man who had nowhere else to go. He looked smaller than I remembered. His eyes sunken, his suit wrinkled. He opened his mouth as if to say something rehearsed, but I kept walking. He fell into step beside me, desperate, the words tumbling out in a tone so hollow it didn't belong to my son anymore. He said he didn't know the full truth. He said he was misled. He said Kayla had pushed him. He said he had lost everything. He said he regretted it all. I stopped, not because I believed him, but because I didn't need to anymore. I told him this. I said I did not live my life to be remembered as someone's financial plan. I said his apology, whether sincere or not, could not rewrite the chapters he had torn out of our family's story. I said I no longer carried anger, because it had no place in the life I was building now. But I also said I no longer carried space for him. He cried. I watched. Then I walked to my car. I left him on the sidewalk, still talking, still explaining, still hoping. But I drove away with the windows down and the air sweet with spring. In the following months, the house was sold. I didn't need all that space anymore. I bought a modest condo near the waterfront, with just enough room for me, my books, and a guest or two. McClellan visited often. She brought fresh peaches and stories from her days volunteering with veterans. We laughed like schoolgirls sometimes. Other days, we simply sat, both grateful for the quiet, both women who had survived the expectations of others and emerged with more than anyone ever planned to give us. One Saturday afternoon, I received a hand-drawn thank you card from a woman named Beatrice. She was 65, newly divorced, and had just learned how to file her own taxes for the first time in her life. She wrote that it made her feel free. She wrote that she had always thought it was too late. Now she knew better. That night, I cried. Not from sadness, but from the kind of release that only comes when every battle has been fought and your heart is finally your own again. The past hadn't vanished. It was still there, like old scars, but it no longer dictated my worth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt proud. Not of what I had lost, not even of what I had won, but of who I had chosen to become. And sometimes, that's the most powerful justice of all. If this story found a place in your heart, take a moment for yourself today. Whether it's a quiet cup of tea or a walk under the trees, remember, healing doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to stop chasing what hurt you and start building something that brings you peace. Tell me, what would justice look like for you if no one else got to define it?